Komodo. And any questions so far before we start actually doing the coding on this one? Okay, so there are 3 parts to this example, and essentially what we're doing is we are going to use loops to represent the represent an insect population. Okay, so right now, if you run it, just so you can see what your browser looks like, all it is it says below will print out insect info. That's that H1. And then there are 4 divs that exist that we haven't put any information into yet. Okay. All right, so let's look at the first part first. A given insect population doubles every week. If 2 insects exist on the first week, how many weeks will pass until the insect population exceeds 10,000 insects? Use a while loop to output the insect population each week until the population exceeds 10,000. Okay, so I'm looking at this. The reason I like this problem is because it doesn't just tell us exactly what we need to do, right? It gives us a real life scenario, and it's asking us to use programming to solve this problem. So the first thing that I'm gonna do before I even start coding is I'm gonna write myself some comments that tell me what I need to do in JavaScript. Okay, so I know that I am going to create a while loop. But before I do that, right, because with while loops, we always initialize a variable first. So I'm going to initialize a variable called I, right? And what is the starting value of I going to be?
2.
2, yeah. Cool. Yeah, so in our examples, we saw that I was equal to 1, but in this case, I equals 2. Okay. Then we're going to create a while loop that executes until I, or let me write this better. Create a while loop that executes while I is less than or equal to 10,000. Now, it wants us to print out 2 different things, right? It wants us to print out how many weeks pass until it exceeds 10,000. And it also wants us to print out the insect population each week until it exceeds 10,000. So that tells me that I need another variable, right? I'm going to initialize another variable called weeks. Now I'm back down to line 28 where I'm talking about my while loop. And I'm going to say each time the loop executes, print out the insect population. And I'm going to print it. If you see it in yours, it's on it's on line 9. I have a div called insect pop1. So I'm going to print out the insect population to the div called insect pop1. And add 1 to weeks. what else do I need to do to that insect population before I print it out? Or after I print it out, I guess I should say.
Find a way to make it stop at 10,000?
Yeah. So we're going to make it stop at 10,000 with that while loop, but we need to increase that insect population, right? So the insect population is going to double, right? I'm going to say double the value of I and add 1 to weeks. The last thing I'm going to put in here is that after this is all done, I need to print out, I'm going to say print the total number of weeks it took to the div called weeks 1. All right, so we got ourselves set up. And I'm going to go ahead and delete. No, I'm not. I'm going to leave it there. Okay, here we go. Line 25. Int, var I equals 2. Initialize variable called I that is equal to 2. We did it. It's done. Then we're going to create a variable called weeks, and we are going to initialize it to 0. Because at the beginning, the number of weeks that have passed is 0. Okay. Now we create our while loop. Here's the magic. While I is less than or equal to 10,000, because like we said, this is going to run until it exceeds 10,000. So we know when we see exceeds, we know that means less than or equal to. Ooh, not less than or equal. Whoa. Just less than or equal to. Okay. While I is less than or equal to 10,000, we are going to we're going to do document dot get element by ID called insect pop1 dot inner HTML equals and here's where we're going to get fancy because we want it to print out whatever is already in there, right? Plus the new thing. So we're going to do dot get element by ID insect pop1 dot inner HTML plus space plus I. So this will print out whatever is already there, a space, and the new value of I. And then we're going to say I equals I times 2, doubles the population, and weeks equals weeks plus 1. Or we want to make this look cooler and use less words, weeks plus plus. So working through this before we test it and see what happens, We've created a variable called I, which is the number of insects. We've set it equal to 2. That's the number that we start with. We've created a variable called weeks. We've set it equal to 0. While the number of insects is less than or equal to 10,000, we're going to replace this div with whatever is already in there, plus a space, plus I. We're then going to multiply I by 2 because the population doubles each week, and we're going to increase weeks by 1.
Why do we have to do document get by an ID twice? Why can't we just write it all like once, just like document and then add the plus and stuff?
Yep, so you could do this a couple of different ways. The first way we could do it is we could create a string variable. We could create a variable called, insect population, and we could add to it each time. But what this statement does is it replaces whatever is inside that HTML component. So if we didn't include this, the only value that would print to that space would be the last value of I.
Okay.
We can try it both ways too, so we can see it in action. Go ahead and save your code what it is right now. And you should get something that looks like this. So it's printed out 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, and it shows us our insect population doubling. 8192 times 2 is definitely more than 10,000, so we know that our while loop executed the right way. Cool. The one thing we didn't do, so Deborah, just to go to your point, so let's say we did it this way, where we only put the 1, and we just printed I. It's just going to print the final number.
Okay, and we want all the numbers at this point.
Yeah, we want to see basically how it grew by week. Now, what's really cool about this is that as we continue to learn how to do this, we could use this process, this while process, or the loop, to generate a table of data, right? Right now, we're just putting the text in a straight line, but we could use this to generate a table of data, which is pretty cool. All right, the last thing we're going to do for this first part is we're going to print the total number of weeks it took to the div, and we're going to call it to the div that's called weeks 1. So all we're doing at this point is we are doing document.getElementById. In that parentheses, we're going to put weeks 1 dot inner HTML. And I'm going to get fancy with it, and I'm going to say it took blank, or make sure there's a space, sorry, not blank, plus weeks, plus space, weeks for the insect population to exceed 10,000. So I save it, and it tells me that it took 13 weeks for us to get above 10,000. Ooh, I forgot my semicolon. My bad. Okay. So pretty cool that we can take a problem that we actually need a solution to, and we can represent it in code. Right? The programming assignment for this week is pretty easy, comparatively, the base version of it. But we'll get to see these next week when we start using, I think next week is forms. We'll get to use these in a little bit more application as you apply, apply it to a real world problem of your choosing, which then you'll get to use in your final project. Okay, so like I said before, we can basically take this and we can rewrite it as a for loop. So it's basically the same thing, but it looks different. It's a little bit sleeker. So in order to do this, and I'm going to rewrite it, and then I'll comment out what we did before. All right. We're going to say for, we take our initializing statement, so I equals 2, right? Taking it from up here. I is less than or equal to 10,000. Oops, 10,000. And we're using semicolons to separate all of these. So taking this statement, the conditional, so initialize, our conditional is here. And then I equals I times 2, which is what we're taking right here. And then we're going to copy line 31. And line 33. And we're also going to go ahead and copy line 36, just so we have the whole thing. And then once you have this constructed, I'm going to leave it up on my screen for now. Go ahead and comment out all of the rest of it. So the while loop that you already created. And the only thing you're going to leave open is this var weeks equals 0. Okay, so that for loop cleaned up our code a lot, right? We got it down to 4 lines when originally it would have been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines of code. Okay. Now, if you did this correctly, when we save it, it should still look exactly the same. Cool.
Wait, let me see what you did. Oh, I forgot some. I forgot the little thing there.
I personally love for loops because I like how clean it is. I like that you get all 3 statements in one line of code, but either are correct. You can use whichever one you prefer. All right, this last one, we have about 8 minutes left till I know some people might have to get off, so I want to make sure that we get through the do while loop if you're following along. So this last part says, researchers have discovered that every 4 weeks, a disease is killing 40% of the insect population after the population has reproduced. If 2 insects exist on the first week, how many weeks will pass until the insect population exceeds 10,000 insects? Use a do while loop that outputs the insect population each week until the population exceeds 10,000 insects. Okay, so just a reminder so we can look at it. Let me pull up my do while so you can see it. You share. Right, so our do while statement, it looks like a while loop, except we go through it at least once, and then our while loop, or the conditional, is at the end. Okay. How do you make it so your numbers are spaced out? Oh, great question, Jeanette. So mine, let me show you. So with mine, in order for the numbers to be spaced out, what I did is I added document.getElementById plus a space in quotes plus I. So I just added an extra plus and a space in quotes. All right. So here we go. We're going to use a different letter because we've already used I for this for loop that we're already using. So let's use X. And we're going to say X equals 2, right? We're starting with 2 insects. Ooh, whoops, var X equals 2. And we're going to say var weeks 2 equals 0 because we're doing a second model. And then to do our do while, we're going to do and if we read back through this, right, every 4 weeks, a disease kills 40% of the insect population, okay, after they reproduce. So the first thing we're going to do is X equals X times 2, because they double first. Then we do X equals, it's killing off 40%. So instead, we're going to multiply X by 0.6. Right? So killed off 40%, so we're multiplying it by 0.6. And then do the same thing we did before. So document.getElementById, except this time we are printing to insect pop 2. .inner HTML equals, just like we did before, document.getElementById insect pop 2 inner HTML plus, and this is my space again, plus X. And then I'm going to add weeks 2 equals, oh, nope, I'm just going to do plus plus. So there's our do part of our loop. And remember, we have to do our while after the fact. And we are going to do while X is less than or equal to 10,000. When we click save, sorry, I'll get off of this so you can see. When I click save, underneath this 13 weeks, it should print my insect population, okay? There it is in all of its amazing glory, all of the decimals. Now, interestingly, right, it prints out the first week and it goes over 10,000. And that's because the do while loop executes at least one time before it calculates the number of, before it determines if it meets the conditional or not.
I have a question. What did
Yeah.
you want? What did you want it to print out like integers instead of floats, since you did the 0.6, and wouldn't you just want like a whole integer instead of like having floats around like decimals?
Yeah, so you could. Do you remember how you do that?
No.
We're gonna do something called parse int, I think. Let me make sure this is right. Oh, hold up, it doesn't like that. Does not like that. Hold up, hold up, hold up. Let's do it this way instead. Instead of it doing it there. Let's do it here. And there we go.
Ah, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, so you have to be really careful about where you put that parse int, because like you saw when I did it up here, it just always was 2, right? So when we do it here on line 54, we're just doing it to print it out. We're not actually changing the value of x. Okay? So here, we're parsing it as an int so that it prints out nice and it only shows us whole insects. If we do it here, we're always setting x to an integer value and we're actually messing with the number. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yep, cool.
Thank you.
All right, and then the last thing we're gonna do on this one, just like we did before, we're gonna do document.getElementById. And it is weeks, I think it's WKS2. Yep, weeks 2. Right there. Dot inner HTML equals. And here's where you could get fancy, right? So we're gonna say it took plus weeks 2 plus weeks for the insect population to exceed 10,000 with the disease. That's a terribly written sentence. Don't do that. Maybe we want with the disease taken into consideration. It took weeks 2 weeks for the insect population to exceed 10,000. So save it, run it. 47 weeks, but is 47 the right number? So here's the thing. Our last value is above 10,000, right? That shows. Oh yeah, so it would be 47. So maybe the one up here, maybe weeks 1, we need to add 1 to, right? Because this week's is telling us the last number that it was at to be under 10,000. All right, so there you go. Difference between while loops, for loops, do while loops. Like I said, I'm gonna post the information for you all to be able to access this online textbook, totally free. The reason I like it is because it has a whole bunch of practice problems that are graded, not graded, but gives you feedback automatically. I don't see your work in it. It's just for you to practice. But they have some really good practice problems, and it's a nice way, you know, to just check for understanding and make sure you understand what, well, that's what check for understanding means. Make sure that you have a good grip on how to move between these 3. The other thing that I would suggest is, as you're working through this and it's your first time working with loops and you're going to work with switch statements, I would just encourage you to utilize those trace tables. So like that one where we traced and actually looked at, you know, what is the value of I at this point? Or what is the value of weeks at this point, right? And you can kind of map what your code is doing. This one obviously would be a pain in the butt because it's just a large, they're just large numbers. But you know, when you're just practicing with it generally, it's nice to be able to trace your code by using a variable trace table. Okay. Okay, what questions come up, or is anybody's code not working and maybe we can troubleshoot? Ooh, your result is different than mine. James, tell me why. What is your result?
Oh, never mind. I managed to fix it.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I was missing the .inner HTML.
Oh, yeah. So what did it print?
It printed like a bracket. Then we're next in between those brackets. It says object something something dot get element by ID.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was trying to edit the actual element itself and not the stuff that's inside of it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Cool. And honestly, with all of this, the more you practice, the better that you'll be at it. For a lot of people, loops are really hard to visualize. That's why I like thinking about it, you know, kind of like we think about song lyrics.